Quorum Radio, baby.
You're listening to Quorum Radio.
Quorum Radio now on with Jim Jenkins. James Curtis Jenkins was born in 1942, and after he enlisted in the United States Navy, he became a Navy hospital corpsman and won a place in the School of Laboratory Sciences and Blood Banking at the National Naval Medical School of Bethesda, Maryland. He attended classes during the day and stood duty every fourth night in the Bethesda morgue, assisting the pathology residents performing autopsies. When John F. Kennedy was assassinated on November 22nd, 1963, his body was taken to Bethesda Naval Hospital for autopsy. Along with fellow students Paul K. O'Connor, Jenkins was assigned to assist doctors Joseph Humes, Thornton Boswell, and Dr. Pierre Fink in the autopsy of JFK. After leaving the Navy, he obtained an undergrad degree from the University of Mississippi in Science and Biology. He continued his graduate studies in pathology, anatomy, and immunology, receiving a master's of combined clinical science from the University of Mississippi Medical School in Jackson, Mississippi. Jim Jenkins, he's author of the book, At the Cold Shoulder of History, the chilling story of a 21-year-old naval hospital corpsman who stood at the shoulder of JFK during the Bethesda autopsy. Again, as I said, he's the last surviving member of the JFK autopsy team. Jim, it's great to have you on Quorum Radio. How are you today?
I'm fine.
That's great. Well, listen, I wanted to kind of jump into this. Recreate, if you can, for us that day, November 22nd. What do you remember about that day when you woke up? Anything?
Really was kind of a normal day up until about 3:30, I guess, when we were told that actually I was in the class. We had a break, and Bill Lynch, who was one of the fellow students, had gone out to get something to drink, a soda or something, came back and told us that the president had been shot in Dallas. We kind of, didn't really think too much of it. Everybody was laughing, talking about it, and not talking about that, but they were laughing at Bill because Bill was kind of a jokester. And then the instructor came in and said that class was dismissed, that the president had been shot in Dallas, and that he had died from his injuries. And he told the duty crew, which was myself and Paul, that we were to report to the morgue and prepare for an autopsy in the event that the president's body was sent to us. We joined a first-class hospital corpsman who was the non-commissioned officer of the day for the laboratory, and we went to the morgue. Paul and I started preparing for the morgue, preparing the morgue for an autopsy, which is what we normally did. We started labeling specimen jars and setting up the instrument trays and that type of stuff. And we had chosen the next autopsy number in the autopsy log. We were using that as to label the jars along with the president's name. And then we were told that we actually were going to get the president's body. And then we were told we were not to log it in to the log, and that we were to remove the labels from the jars and then use only the autopsy number that we had.
Wow.
And so we went through that procedure again, which was it was kind of extensive. And at that point in time, we just pretty much waited. And then the body came in, was brought into the morgue by a group of people in suits, and I think there may have been a couple of high-ranking military people with them, usually flag officer rank, which would be admiral or general. And I was a little taken back by the fact is that the appearance of the casket, that that they brought in. It was basically a shipping casket, and the casket was brought in, placed on the floor, and Paul went over to help remove the body from the casket. I didn't go over. I was at the table, the autopsy table. There were too many people over there to begin with, and it was a small space. So they took the body out of the casket, laid it on the table in front of me. The body was wrapped in sheets. The body and the head were wrapped separately. We after they put the body on the table, Dr. Boswell thanked everybody for their help and asked them to leave. And they left the morgue. Dr. Boswell told Paul and I to keep the door locked, and he left the morgue for about 15, 20 minutes, I guess. And then I just assumed he was going upstairs to the laboratory in order to talk with Dr. Humes to, kind of work out their plan for doing the autopsy. And
Right.
yeah.
So I was going to ask you a quick
After about
question, Jim.
20,
Oh,
sure.
go ahead. I'm sorry. No, you go right ahead, Jim.
No, I basically after about 15, 20 minutes, Dr. Boswell came back. He was alone. He gave me a clipboard that had what we called a face sheet on it, which was actually a sheet for weights and organ weights, body weights, distinguishing scars, things of that, wounds, things of that nature.
Yes, sir.
Basically, it was used to locate those. Dr. Boswell and I unwrapped the body. We didn't unwrap the head. And we started doing the face sheet. He would dictate to me or tell me where to place the scars and that we found and so forth, and possible wounds, that type of thing. And then as we were finishing that up, Dr. Humes came in, and Dr. Humes had 4 flag officers with him. As he came into the morgue proper, I have to understand that there were actually 2 rooms there. The entranceway from the hallway was a double door into an anteroom where the coal boxes for the bodies were. And that was a small room there where the log and the basically tags that we used to tag the bodies were. And then you came into the morgue proper where the autopsy tables and so forth were.
Jim, I want to ask you a question. Excuse me, once before we continue. Just getting back to the whole matter of, when the casket was brought in, how many feet away were you from there, between yourself and the casket?
I was across the table from at the head of the table, and the casket was placed on the floor on the opposite side from me at the foot of that table, and that's where the body was taken out.
Sure. So you're saying, like, maybe how many feet?
I would say the table was probably 6.5, 7 feet long, so I was probably no more than 8 feet.
Wow. And did you do me a favor? Just
maybe closer.
okay.
Pardon?
Just a couple of questions about the casket. What color
Sure.
was it?
It was kind of that's not it's probably not a fair question to ask me. I'm red green colorblind. but
right.
it was a typical shipping casket that you see. You've seen them on television when they were bringing bodies home. It was kind of I want to say maybe a bronze silver type thing, or not really bronze, but brown silver thing. It was a plain casket, very plain, as they all are. And I was a little surprised that the president's body would come in a casket like that because, he was the president of the United States. And
Of course. So absolutely. So, wow. So then people brought him in. I think you said Dr. Boswell left temporarily about 15 minutes, right?
yes, there wasn't anything. I mean, I wasn't surprised at that. Again, like I said, normally when we had an autopsy, the residents would have the history, the medical history. So, sometimes they would read it before they came to the morgue, and the coroner would start the autopsy and do the preliminaries. But and so like I said, I assumed that maybe that's what they were doing, preparing for the autopsy, which would have not been abnormal.
Sure.
or
And at that
unusual.
time, okay. So while I guess you were with Paul O'Connor at that time, while you were waiting for.
Yeah, Paul and I were as far as I remember, Paul and I were the only two in the morgue at
that
that
moment.
time. Now, I think the first class had left. He was in and out a lot that night.
Sure. Question I have for you is that you brought the body in, it was completely wrapped in sheets, right?
Right.
Okay. At that point, did you begin to conduct the preliminaries, or were you waiting for the physicians to return to initiate the autopsy?
No, we didn't. We were told not to unwrap the body.
Okay, so
Dr.
you're there
Boswell
standing
told
by.
us not to unlook. Yeah.
Okay, so you might. Just curious. I mean, how did you guys feel at that time? I mean, what was going through your minds? Were you stunned?
Well, no, not really. I mean, it was unusual and, a little tense. And the fact is that, it was the president we were doing it on, and that we were also doing the autopsy with, Dr. Humes and Dr. Fink and Dr. Boswell. Dr. Humes was the commanding officer for the laboratory and pathology, and Dr. Boswell was basically, I guess, under Dr. Stover, which would have been my commanding officer. So, and then Dr. Fink was I believe he was a lieutenant colonel at that time, and then of course Paul and I were just HM3s, so
Right.
we were the lowest ranked person in the totem pole down there. And
Okay, those guys get a
so
lot of
we,
work, a lot of experience. So, just curious, Dr. Pierre Fink, he was with the U.S. Army, wasn't he?
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Would you repeat?
Yes, sir. Dr. Pierre Fink, he was with the U.S. Army or the Pentagon?
Yeah, he was he was from AFIP, Armed Forces Institute of Pathology downtown.
Right.
When I asked who he was, they told me that he was an expert on battlefield wounds. Is what they told me. I later found out
Right.
he was a forensic pathologist.
Great. Okay. Sounds like the Navy wanted to get some more somebody who's a specialist on hand to be able to, who had a lot of experience, I guess, looking at traumatic injuries and bullet-induced injuries. So great. So all right, from that point on, then Doctors Humes, Boswell, and Fink came back, I guess. Then how did things begin? Tell us about it.
Well, we did I mean, again, like I said, as Dr. Boswell and I started doing the face, or did the face sheet, then Dr. Humes came in with the officers. The officers went into the gallery, and Dr. Humes came to the table, and he and Dr. Fink started unwrapping the head and, examining that. When the head was unwrapped, Dr. Humes directed the medical photographer in taking the pictures that he wanted, the photographs that he wanted of the head, and then we did X-rays. I helped Gerald Custer, who was the X-ray tech, do the first set of X-rays. Basically, all I did was place the cassettes and then help position the body.
Right.
And that was and then everybody had left the room except for us and the doctors. Gerald took the X-rays up to X-ray to develop, because in those days, they were developed in tanks. And
Sure.
he brought them back, and they were looked at, and we found no bullet fragments, no large pieces of metal anywhere. There were a few trace element pathways, but not really. They really weren't that prominent. And so the individuals that were in the gallery, which were, like I said, I only knew one of those, which was Admiral Galloway, and I don't know who the others were.
Right.
I was told at the time that the one that was kept directing the autopsy was Dr. Berkeley, but I've later found that Dr. Berkeley was actually the individual that was running from upstairs in the presidential suite from Bobby Kennedy down to the morgue, directing what could be done in the morgue as far as what they were being allowed to do by Bobby Kennedy. And that again is something that I just recently found out. The head was examined, and I was standing at the right shoulder. Dr. Fink was standing at my left shoulder, and Dr. Humes was at his left shoulder, and Dr. Boswell was directly across the table from me. And right. They examined the head, and they were examining the head, and I was paying close attention to what they were saying and so forth, because if they asked me for something, then I needed to make sure that I heard what they were saying. And they first, after they took the photographs, so forth, they first started examining the head, and the right side of the head was very malleable. You could kind of move it around with your hands, or mold it with your hands. But sure. They found a wound on the right temple that was above the ear and slightly forward to the ear, almost right inside the hairline. And Dr. Fink, he had to move the hair around to see it, but it had the borders of it were gray, or they were graying color. And Dr. Fink had made the statement that maybe that was caused by a bullet. And then while they were examining that, Dr. Humes got called back over to the gallery and talked to the individual again. And then he came back and he told Dr. Fink that they needed to let that go and get on the major or the large wound in the back of the head.
Sure. Let me ask you a question. Excuse me, Jim, just a quick interjection. How many people were in the gallery, roughly? How many people were in the gallery watching?
I have no idea. The only people that I remember in the gallery were the four people that were directly in front of me.
Sure.
I know there were people in and out. There were other people in the gallery. I don't have any idea how many, but there were, I would say there were quite a few, maybe.
Sure.
I don't really know.
The question I want to ask you is that when you first saw the body, what was the first thing you noticed?
Well, when I first saw the body after I unwrapped it, I didn't see a lot of, damage because I was only looking at the body proper. I could see the wound in the throat, and that later we were told not to bother with that because it was just an emergency tracheotomy, and so we didn't examine it. And when the head was unwrapped, you couldn't tell much about the wound in the back. It was, you could tell there was some bone and tissue missing, but the head was the hair and so forth was so matted, and it was matted, stuck together and so forth by blood and serum, and it looked like quite a mess. But once the scalp was reflected back from the skull, you could tell, the borders, the limitations of the wound, how large the wound was, which is something you couldn't tell before that.
Right. So the question I want to ask you is that, we've seen so many photos. People are confused about what really happened, what the wounds consisted of. There's a photo, it's pretty famous, purportedly, supposedly of JFK's head, and it shows towards the back around the cowlick, there's a wound about the size of a pencil, number 2 pencil. I mean, I don't know, I'm estimating. And it looked like there was some fracturing there. I mean, describe the wound in the back of the head, Jim.
Well, the wound in the back of the head was kind of, I guess, it's kind of a contradictory thing, but it was a kind of a rectangular trapezoid. It kind of started at the top, which was pretty much the widest portion of it, but it was rounded, a little concave at the top, came down, and it had about, it had a fracture at the bottom right that kind of went off to the right like a tail, and then it had fractures radiating from the focal points on the wound, where the bone was missing itself. It radiated kind of off to the left at the top and right, and another couple of other things where the wound was, where the bone is missing, it was jagged. It was, it was about, I guess, 6-7 centimeters long from top to bottom, maybe 5-6 centimeters wide. About, I say it was about about 3.5, 4 inches from top to bottom, maybe 3 inches wide, 2.5, 3 inches wide.
Right. So that particular photo that one sees, it showed a gloved hand, and to the right, towards the front, ahead of the right ear, towards the temple, there was I guess a skull flap. And
Oh yeah, yeah.
what do you think? Is that photo?
That was
What's your?
that was. I didn't see that flap. I suspected that flap was made whenever Dr. Humes. See, when we first saw it, there was an incision. I'm saying incision, but a kind of a tear from the top right of the wound to the almost well, actually a little past the coronal suture, almost to the frontal bone. Now,
Right.
that was the tissue, and it looked as if there were multiple tears in the tissue that had been connected surgically. When I say surgically, the connection to those were very smooth, as if they had been cut, and that was over a fracture. There were two major fractures lines in the skull, one kind of high and then one lower above the ear in that area. And that kind of followed that fracture, not perfectly, but anyway. When the skull was reflected back, or when the scalp was reflected back, some of the bone that was being held together by the scalp and so forth had fallen into the cavity, cranial.
Yeah.
But
Right.
those photographs,
Recreations? What do you think?
I think that's the Fox photographs. There's a lot of things wrong with those photographs.